some late people roll in. That's okay. This is a very unusual Gonzaga Socratic Club / Filmosophy that is actually a cooperative effort between the Socratic Club and Filmosophy and Dr. Layne. We're going to be talking about a film tonight. Who's seen To the Wonder? Maybe we should start there. Okay, not everybody. That's all right. We've tried to make it accessible, even to folks who haven't seen the film. Let me just say a word about the Socratic Club. Dr. Layne can tell you about Filmosophy in a second when she has a word. The Socratic Club has been around for a little over 15 years here at Gonzaga. It is, even though it has the word club in the name, it's not a club like most clubs are. You don't have to join or... anyway, it doesn't. We don't get funds from GSA or anything like that. So it's named after the Oxford Socratic Club that was an important organization on the Oxford University campus in the mid-1900s. It was presided over by C.S. Lewis and really took as its aim to address really questions about religion and Christianity in an intellectual way. And the Gonzaga Socratic Club follows after that model. We address Christian worldview issues from a broadly philosophical point of view. As I said, today is an unusual Socratic Club. We often have a presenter and sometimes a respondent. We're going to have two presenters today engaged in a kind of discussion, and we'll see where that goes. So it's an experiment. Nobody knows what's going to happen. We'll feel it out. The first question I want to address, and you might have wondered, we're doing a presentation on Terrence Malick, and a lot of people say, I've never heard of Terrence Malick. Who is that? He's an admittedly minor or obscure independent filmmaker. I tried to look for box office stats. Box Office Mojo used to list, you could see lifetime gross box offices, but they've redesigned the site, and it's very hard to find information now. Boo. It's because they were bought out by IMDb, I think. But when they used to allow you to look up directors by listed by lifetime gross, he was something like 700. So way down there, right? So why would we care about this guy and enough to devote especially a combined meeting of the Socratic Club and Filmosophy? Well, he's made a lot of films. Starting in the 70s, Badlands, Days of Heaven, films that you might have heard of. The New World, which is his answer to Pocahontas, basically. It's the Pocahontas story in a way that is clearly intended to respond to the Disney presentation. The Thin Red Line is a World War II film based on a novel about Guadalcanal, basically the American assault on Guadalcanal. Tree of Life is probably his best known film, 2011, and I describe it as a growing up or coming of age story about growing up in Central Texas in the 50s, and it has dinosaurs. So. And then he's done recently, really since The Tree of Life, he's done a series of autobiographical films, especially Tree of Life, To the Wonder, Knight of Cups clearly have autobiographical references. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this Socratic Club Filmosophy is he has a new film coming out in about a month about a conscientious objector during World War II, and it looks beautiful and stunning, and I hope you'll consider it worth your time to take a look at it. So that's upcoming. All right. So why pay attention to this obscure guy? Well, he has an experimental art film style that has attracted considerable critical acclaim. Generally, professional critics acknowledge that he's a major and important and significant filmmaker, even when they find his films annoying, which they do sometimes. The other thing that's really interesting about him is that from the very beginning, after his first couple of films, which did get lots of critical attention, he's had an A-list of major Hollywood actors that are eager to work with him. It's kind of interesting, if you haven't heard of him, look at the people who have acted in his films. Brad Pitt, Christian Bale, Jim Caviezel, Sean Penn, Jessica Chastain, Colin Farrell. You get the idea. It seems like, or I would say, this is somebody who's worth taking a look at. His films are thoughtful films full of beautiful images with striking use of light. He often films in the water. And by cinematic integration, I mean he's somebody who thinks very carefully about the total effect of visual images plus sound plus the way the story is stitched together. One of the things he's kind of famous for is very elliptical and we might even say fragmentary narration, where it's often hard to figure out what's even going on in the film. And those of you who watched maybe To the Wonder is the only film you've seen by him. It's one of those on the edge of fragmentary narration, so it's hard to figure out what's going on. However, it's very clear from the start he's been interested in addressing philosophical and theological themes in creative and interesting ways. And I'm going to look especially at one of those themes, the theme of transcendence. And just in case transcendence is one of those words that you think, wow, philosophers use that and I have no idea what it means. It might surprise you that sometimes philosophers don't know what it means either, but in my use, what it means is a kind of reaching beyond the everyday, an encounter with the spiritual or the divine or God in particular, or an experience of deeper truth or reality. So it's in a way reaching beyond the everyday lives that we find ourselves embedded in. And this is a persistent theme in Malick's films. And it's one that we actually find in a number of his films, not just, we're going to talk about To the Wonder in particular, but we find it in a number of his films. And I think that in talking about transcendence, Malick has 2 points of reference in many of his films, in particular, though, in To the Wonder, and that is Platonic transcendence and Kierkegaardian themes about transcendence. Many of you, if you've read any philosophy at all, you know Plato's Cave from the Republic. You know the idea of an ascent from illusion and darkness to enlightenment and truth. That's an important picture that Malick finds very striking and interesting. He doesn't directly refer to the cave in his films, but the film that came out after To the Wonder, which is called Song to Song, begins with a reference to Plato's Phaedrus. In fact, it has a narration of a famous part of the Phaedrus about the soul rising up and rising up toward the ideal or the true. Another text that you find this image that I think is even closer to Malick's heart and interest is in the Symposium, the idea of the ladder of love. And the idea there basically is that Plato is arguing that Eros drives us to seek the beautiful, but the beautiful turns out to be closely linked to what is true and what is good as well. And so all of us, if we think about what motivates us to do whatever we do, Plato is in the Symposium suggesting that we're driven by Eros, we're driven by desire. And love is a very common form that Eros takes, but the suggestion that Plato makes in the Symposium is that everything we do that is driven toward happiness is motivated by the same Eros. And it drives us, the ladder that he describes, that Socrates describes, which actually, since we're talking about feminism as well in our discussion today, it's interesting. He admits that he cribbed all of his ideas from a seer, a female prophetess named Diotima. But the idea is that human loves begin with the love of a beautiful body, But we come to understand that beauty is more widely dispersed, and we come to understand that that the eros that drives us doesn't merely attract us to one body, but it also drives us to appreciate beauty in all of its forms, and also to move beyond the body to the soul, and ultimately to politics and culture, until by the time this latter is done, we get to an abstract object, the beautiful itself. That's what, and Socrates says that it's divine, and it's what we really all want. In fact, all of our loves along the ladder are really aimed toward this ultimate, complete, beautiful, and absolute object. I mentioned the other point of reference for Malick is Kierkegaard, Søren Kierkegaard, especially his discussion of despair in the book The Sickness Unto Death. And this is a super simplified categorization of what Kierkegaard's talking about in that work. He describes, in a way, you might think, well, wait, what does despair have to do with transcendence? Despair sounds bad and unpleasant. Well, yeah, that's true. It is. Despair turns out to be a barrier to transcendence. Despair turns out to be we might say, an existential psychological disconnect between the self and what it really is that actually impairs or impedes our ability to seek what is true and what is ultimately meaning, and ultimately to find a coherent self, is the way Kierkegaard talks about this. So he wraps up the idea of transcendence also with the idea of, we could say, existential psychology, finding more order and meaning for yourself as a person. But the very basic way he talks about this is that despair takes two forms, unconscious and conscious. That sounds pretty easy. Unconscious is unaware despair, where your life is messed up and you don't really understand it or don't pay attention to it. And aware despair, obviously, is where you are aware of it, or you are paying attention to it. Now, you might wonder, wait, who suffers despair? Kierkegaard goes at length in the beginning of the book to point out that while we often think that despair is something that artistic types and philosophers suffer, everybody suffers it. He argues that it's universal. All of us want to find meaning and coherence and ultimately transcendence. We want to find something beyond our immediate existence, and yet all of us are frustrated in that goal. So, unconscious, what about conscious? He has a lot to say about this, and as I said, this is the super simplified version. He defines or divides aware despair into two major kinds. Despair of finitude, which is really being embedded in the immediate and the concrete, and being unable to ascend, if you use that Platonic way of talking. But then there's also the despair of infinitude, which might seem paradoxical. Wait, if we want ascent, why would infinitude? Why would leaving the concrete and the immediate behind be despair? Well, Kierkegaard says it is despair if the way that you leave the immediate and concrete behind is by abandoning it, such that you're no longer embedded in the everydayness of your life. What you actually want, the argument he makes in the book, The Sickness Unto Death, is we want a synthesis of concreteness and infinitude. And that's what we fail at achieving. So how does this relate to Malick? Well, in To the Wonder, we find the film is suffused with images of verticality and ascent and descent. There are stairs all over the place. Malick is a very symbolic filmmaker, and often he will present an image for a moment that has nothing to do with the story. The weirdest part of To the Wonder is none of the film takes place in a tropical environment, and there's a short scene of a turtle ascending in the water. What? Well, it's ascent, right? That's why it's stuck there. So we have lots of themes: stairs, up, down, and contrast between the up and the down, and movement up and down, like my example of the turtle. And there's also a lot of contrast between light and dark. Malick is someone who, from the beginning, has been acknowledged as a master of the use of light in his films. And, well, I skipped the second to last one there, lightness and heaviness. So you have themes of what is weighed down and what is airy or light. And by the way, this is relevant too to our discussion of feminism, because one of the things that we'll see is that the main female character, actually lots of Malickian characters frolic around in bizarre ways, but Marina, the main character of To the Wonder, is constantly twirling around. And it might seem because she's an airhead and doesn't have anything better to do, and that's Dr. Layne's argument that she'll talk to you about in a moment here. I think in part what Malick's trying to convey with Marina is the lightness of dance and the potential for ascent. So that's important to her character. So what's going on in To the Wonder? Again, this is a really simplistic reading, but what I want to argue is that in the four main characters, what we get is a kind of reference to the Kierkegaardian catalog of despair, with those Platonic themes in mind all along about ascent, and ascent especially toward the good. The main characters are Neil, Jane, Marina, and Father Quintana. Neil, who is played by Ben Affleck, you might think he's the main character. I don't think he is, even though he's in a lot of the scenes, and the story seems to follow him. But I think what's obvious about the Ben Affleck character is that he represents unconscious despair. He stumbles through his life. He's passive in what he does. He has a job, yes, but he doesn't seem to know who he is or what he does or why he does what he does. He does fall into romantic relationships, but he seems clearly to take the cue of the partners in those romantic relationships. And indeed, he only seems to be awakened to love in a very temporary way and by others. It's not something that he initiates. And I don't know if you like Ben Affleck as an actor. I think he's a little bit wooden in his style, and I would argue he perfectly fits the character of Neil. Neil is a zombie, basically. Neil is a sleepwalker. He does live, he exists, but he is not awake to the reality or the possibility of transcendence. He's not awake to the problem of the self, as Kierkegaard would put it. Jane is played by Rachel McAdams, and she suffers despair of finitude, where she seeks meaning and purpose, especially she seems to, when she raises this question, she seems to frame it in religious terms. She makes reference to the Bible at one point, but she seems also to try to find meaning through love, through eros, in the way that we saw Plato talking about. But it's clear that she's very dependent on the people around her. And this indeed is one of the reasons why we might think that she is, from a feminist point of view, a very negative character. I would agree with that. But I think Malick is depicting a person like this, who has that feature. And indeed, something to notice is, if we're comparing in Kierkegaardian terms, Jane is far better in the quest of selfhood than Neil is. Neil's not even awake. Neil's a zombie. Jane fails, and indeed the scene, it's hard to see, but her part in the film ends with her ascending darkened stairs. So there is a kind of ascent that takes place. I think Malick's suggesting that she cultivates what Kierkegaard would call inwardness, that is a sense of self, but it's a sense of self that's ultimately negative and despairing. I don't like myself. I don't like what's happening to my life. This guy that I was spending time with and seeing has just kind of dumped me, and we don't get along, and I don't know what to do with myself. Marina is the character that I would argue is the main character of the film. She suffers despair of finitude as well, but in a very different way than Jane does. She is constantly, insistently, restlessly seeking And I think the film suggests that she makes progress. I'll show a clip in a moment that I think indicates that. And then Father Quintana is in a way the contrast of Marina, because if both of them suffer forms of despair, Quintana's despair is despair of infinitude. He's a priest. He feels like he has a connection to God. That connection to God has led him to be completely disconnected to concrete people around him. Indeed, as a priest, he's expected to minister to ordinary humans, but what he finds is that he's alienated from ordinary people. In a way, if we use descriptive kind of metaphorical language, we could say he's a spiritual orbiter. He's no longer connected concretely to the task of ministry. And indeed, you might think, oh, well, that means he's made spiritual progress. Well, from Kierkegaard's point of view, and I think also for Malick's, it means, no, he just suffers a different kind of despair. Because he's not connected concretely with the world that he inhabits. Let's see. Where are we time-wise? I'm taking more. Okay, all right. I have two clips that kind of illustrate. This is near the end of the film, and Father Quintana prays a prayer that's been attributed to St. Patrick called the Lorica or breastplate. And the reason it's important thematically for the film is that what Father Quintana comes to realize, he suffered this despair of infinitude. What he comes to realize is, I've been looking for God, and I couldn't find God. It felt like I became distant from God, but also distant from the people I serve. And what Quintana comes to find is that God is concretely present in the people that he ministers to. And so he prays this prayer, and the prayer of St. Patrick is, in a way, it's calling on God to be all around me. But I think also what Malick wants us to see is that the prayer acknowledges that God already always was all around us and in us. So, and notice the images that he uses while this part of this.
Cristo detrás de mí. Cristo en mí. Cristo debajo de mí. Cristo sobre mí. Cristo a mi derecha. Cristo a mi izquierda. Cristo en el corazón. Sedientos. Debemos ser. te asalvas con tu espíritu de vida. Tan completamente que nuestras vidas solo pueden ser un reflejo de tuya. Brille a través de nosotros. Enséñanos cómo buscarte. Estamos hechos para verte.
I have another clip, but I'll save that for later if we have time to get to it. So, not getting any attention. There we go. Okay, I'll just stop here. No, that's all right. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Tag team.
So my PowerPoint isn't nearly as extensive as his, and I have no idea how to make clips. So you're gonna have to kind of deal with me, like trying to find it in the streaming area. So please bear with me. A few things there before I pull up mine. I've seen this movie a couple of times now. And the first time I watched it, I turned it off halfway through because I could not tolerate it. So why couldn't I tolerate it? It wasn't because I can't watch films that are artistic or beautiful or the intent is philosophical. No, but by far I love films that have an aesthetic quality or demand that we think through films. But the problem is I couldn't watch this film the first time all the way through because it demanded that I think about transcendence and beauty at the expense of how it depicts women. Okay, and so I believe that the film depicts women in ways that are very problematic and reinforce what some feminist philosophers call the male gaze. That we have to suspend, that women who watch this film have to suspend what it's like to view a film from our perspective and to put ourselves in the perspective of masculinity and to see what women are supposed to be when we pretend or we become the subject of masculine fantasy. What we're supposed to be women twirling around in fields. We're supposed to, if you notice, even in the particular clip that you saw of Professor Calhoun, what you get is you constantly see Marina or Jane staring longingly at Neil, and you never see Neil reciprocate that, right? So you get a kind of backhanded view, so that you're always seeing the longing of the feminine character towards the masculine character. And I would argue, and as you'll see in a few minutes, that's quintessential for demanding that women who view this film have to put ourselves in the perspective of seeing womanhood as that which gazes at masculinity, needs masculinity, whereas we never get that sense that the masculine gazes back at the feminine in such a desperate way. But that's just my first, that's what happened to me the first time I watched it. I was like, pish posh, I'm done with this film. I can't. So after about an hour and 15 minutes, it's a 2-hour film, I said, I can't watch women twirling around any longer. I turned it off. However, I gave it a second chance because my good friend said that Professor Calhoun said that this was one of the most revolutionary, beautiful films of all time. And I said, no way, it's horrible, it's sexist, I refuse. But then because he's a good friend and I respect his film, because we watch films together all the time. I would say that it's one of our primary activities, is that we watch films, dissect them for their philosophical meaning, intent, and worth. And I would say a good chunk of our friendship is in disagreeing about the films that we watch, but also agreeing fundamentally about certain things. I agree fundamentally, upon second viewing of this film, that this film is about transcendence. This film is definitely trying to talk about how we need to find ways in which we are in relationships with others, that we kind of are empty shells and often walking around like zombies, as Neil demands. Or seems to demand in the depiction of him in this film. However, I don't think it does it well. I think that this film demands that I just forget about all the bad ways it's depicting women and forget all about all the bad acting and terrible screenplay, so that I can interpret and get to this nugget of this idea of transcendence. And I just refuse. That's basically the bottom line. But let me get to my little PowerPoint, which has all my clips or the minutes where I can show you these things. So give me a moment. Sorry, I'm really bad with these kinds of things. All right, where's mine? Okay, so I have here what is the male gaze, right? And so here, Laura Mulvey is a feminist film theorist from Britain, best known for her essay on visual pleasure and narrative cinema. She's the person who coined this idea in a popular way called the male gaze, but I would say Simone de Beauvoir, many feminist theorists would have argued for the perspective of the male gaze long before this film critic. But if you're going to look it up in cinema history, she's going to be the person who gets credit for this. Mulvey states that gender power asymmetry is a controlling force in cinema. So to the wonder, is it going to be the only film that does this? But most feminist critics are going to say that through the history of filmmaking, we've been getting women only from the perspective of masculinity. Why? Well, because mostly men are directors, screenwriters, and stars, and that all of film has really been reinforcing this perspective of the dominant worldview as a masculine worldview, so that we keep getting the same story about women over and over and over again, i.e. that they're ingenues, or that they're always in relationships, it's always about love stories, or what the point is that we haven't yet been really seeing what women are in and of themselves, because most of Hollywood has been framing women through the perspective of masculinity. And so here, it's a controlling force in cinema, constructed for the pleasure of the male viewer, which is deeply rooted in patriarchal ideologies and discourses. And so, to kind of sum up what films that are made from the perspective of masculinity or the male gaze, is that the male viewer is the target audience. Okay? And we can see this into The Wonder quite clearly, I think. To The Wonder is constantly, we don't need Ben Affleck's face. The camera's constantly behind it, so as to remind you that the perspective is always to be looking at these women from Ben Affleck's or Neil's perspective, so that we barely ever get a shot at him. We're never made to interrogate his face in the way that we're made to interrogate Marina or Jane constantly over and over again. Whereas, so I just put that out there. It's one of the reasons why. It's also one of the reasons why I think we constantly see twirling women over and over again, because it's this projection that women are these beautiful things that are in fields wearing sundresses, touching rain all of the time in this film. I was going to make, so first off, I'm not as tech savvy about making clips, but I thought about it. I thought, okay, let's make a really long clip of all the moments in which women are twirling around or jumping on beds constantly. I don't, like, these are 30-year-old women jumping on beds every like 5 minutes in this film. I'm sorry, I haven't jumped on a bed in a really, maybe I'm just not living, maybe I'm not transcending, I don't know. In any case, the key here, so it's not just jumping on beds, but touching grain is my favorite one, right? This is this image that what women do when they walk through fields is touch the grain. Or there's even one scene in which they like fall down to the grain and start making love. And I'm like, I know I'm thinking about ticks. I'm not really enjoying like even viscerally watching. And then I maybe even one of the clips I have, Rachel Adams' character Jane, she walks down hallways touching the what are these things? Walls. And my point is that like the depiction of, so Ben Affleck's character is never touching walls in a strange way, like as they walk through hallways, but this idea, this image that women somehow have to have this kind of grace where they have to touch everything and look forlornly, and so this you see constantly over and over again, whereas you don't see the men in this film ever depicted in such a kind of vacuous, touching grain kind of way, twirling around. But again, this film is made from the perspective of a man who has this projection, this idea of what beauty is and what feminine beauty is. And feminine beauty is sundresses and twirling around and somehow transcending things while touching walls. I don't know. In any case, so another thing that you see in films that are masculine is that women bear meaning. Okay, so as David says, I agree. I think that Marina bears a lot of meaning in this film, and that we have to read her for being a symbol. But that's also part of the problem. Marina's character does not make meaning in this film. Okay, and so that's a really important idea, that her character is not active. It has no project, but the only project she has is to marry Ben Affleck. That's the only project she has. That's it. Okay. And at the end, she even decides that she wants to keep his name, even after they break up. That she has to keep his name. And I know there's arguments that keeping his name is a reference to the divine or God, keeping God's name. But the problem is that this film does not tease that out in a way that's responsible. Okay? It only seems to reinforce this relationship with Ben Affleck's character. And if it had been responsible and made a character that was more complex, then we could actually have a debate about whether or not the desire to keep the name is in reference to a kind of keeping faith with God. And it would have been interesting for me, because I love films like that. But this film does not do that for me. In any case, women are passive or aesthetic objects of male desire. I've already basically told you about all the twirling and bouncing on beds and longingly looking at them. And there's just, I don't know which clips I decided to show you, so we'll find out. But there's one where Marina basically is like, it's constantly creating this face of seduction, but also seduction that's in a state of fear all the time. And so this kind of masculine desire for the object of desire to need and want, because it's afraid of the world, and so that you can rescue this trepid little aesthetic, feature, like dependent animal, basically. Constantly defined by a relationship with men. So both the women in this film are only defined by the relationship with men, whereas Neil is defined by his job. So one of the arguments that David wanted to make was that we also see the men in this film in despair, but all the men in this film are defined separately from the women in this film, whereas the women are only defined in relationship with men. We see that Neil has a job, and a job that he does well and is separate, like, so he goes off and we see shots of him doing his work and defined by his work, and the same with the priest, I don't remember his name, Quinton, thank you. He also has a lived experience outside his relationships, even with his parishioners or women, so that we see him doing work, whereas there's a hint, so as we've seen a minute in the clips I showed, that we see women doing work in this film, but not well. Okay, so the Rachel McAdams character, she's supposed to be a rancher, and she can't even throw a barrel of hay. I'll show you in just a second. But also, Marina is supposed to be a dancer. And we see a hint that she might have been a professional dancer when she plays with some ballet slippers. But the only time we see her dancing is in a really trivial, unskilled, frivolous way. Like, she doesn't seem to have any idea of what a step is or a pose, and so we see no skill or understanding of what all dance is twirling around in the field, even though she's supposed to be some sort of dancer. And so I really want to emphasize that, dance, we don't want to make this dance like, oh, she's in touch with nature, she's beautiful, but dance here is emptied of any sort of skill or art. What Terrence Malick could easily have done is make her a professional dancer who, the way she expresses everything about herself is through the elongating pose of a particular ballet, so that we could see that she works through her despair in dance. But what we get rather is just, once again, twirling around in fields. As you can see, I'm pretty angry about the twirling around in fields, but I can't help it. I'm a crazy feminist. And so here, constantly scared and incompetent is basically what we see over and over again. So let's see if I can show you some of these things. So here's basically my critique of Marina. Let me get the film up. I've told you about the constant critiquing or constant dancing, but one of the scenes that I actually think is quite revealing about the fact that this film is made from the perspective of a person who has no understanding of women and their complexity, is a scene in which they go to the doctor. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that scene instead of all the twirling, because I think you guys objectively can agree that that happens in the film, right? Are you okay with that? Okay. Otherwise, I can show you twirling. Do we want twirling? No? Okay.
Awaken the love. The behind presence.
Oh, maybe it's not present.
Excludes and leads to that extra. You say, Christ
Maybe I missed that.
said these, Christ said that. What do you say? And what you say, does it come from God within? Answer that which is of God in every woman, every man.
I think you went back a little too far. You had it almost. That's too far.
Christ said that. What do you say? And what you say, does it come from God within? Answer that which is of God and every man, every man. Know each other in that love and never change. She's going to let the promise. Emotions, expressions, orders, show you here on the monitor. This is uterus, and the IUD that you have in place
He's
there.
explaining her uterus to
We
her.
feel like that maybe one of the less risky procedures that we can do is to remove this device, and we see if those symptoms don't resolve. I think something that you and your husband need to consider is, with the absence of the IUD, is this a time that you may want to think about children, or is there another means for contraception?
So I don't need to have a hysterectomy.
That's the good news.
Okay, so this is really, so for any woman who has used birth control, so what's supposed to have happened is that she's experiencing uterine pain or maybe some bleeding or something that has caused her to go to the doctor about those things. Every woman who's ever gone to a gynecologist will complain about those things and often not take their boyfriend with them when they go to find out what's wrong. But more importantly, most women know they have an IUD, and know where the uterus is and don't need a white little doctor to show it where it is. And then most often, right, when they're experiencing uterine pain or maybe some bleeding, we don't immediately think we need a hysterectomy. Just want to make sure. She was relieved that she didn't need a hysterectomy. First off, she's going to the doctor as with her boyfriend for what's likely just a normal problem, right? But this male director has made this out to be some severe, anguishing moment where she has no idea, like she needs her boyfriend to be there, first off, to find out that she has an IUD that might be causing complications. Okay? And that she's sitting there like as so afraid of moving a hysterectomy. If you have an IUD, okay, you know that there are possible complications. And you go to the doctor and you're like, all right, it's not really working, and then you take it out. It's not a dramatic moment. It's not something like she's afraid of having. It's what women go through all the time. But a male director thinks that these things are big deals, and so it's made a big deal of it. Where in the next scene she's lying in bed all sad because she's had her IUD taken out. Like, what is that? And so I just want to kind of emphasize, from the perspective of masculinity, who has no real understanding of what an IUD is, has made this out to be some traumatic moment. Okay, and so we also see her depicted as somehow incompetent of how her body works, needing it explained. I want you to realize that if you get your IUD taken out, now you're going to have to start thinking about children. Oh! I had no idea that that's what the IUD was for. Thank you, white male doctor, for explaining to me that if I had my IUD removed, I might get pregnant. Okay, so other things like that. I think she didn't know that. But she does look really scared, like she didn't know that. Oh, are we going to have children now? Is how she's depicted. All right, sorry guys, as you can see, I'm not an impartial reader myself. I'm going to do the same thing. Let me run through this list of complaints. So constant toiling, always connected with nature. So one of the ways that masculine writers throughout history have depicted women as if they are these natural creatures. And so this is why we get lots of pictures of women touching green. There's this one, right, where she's not only does this film constantly have her dancing, my favorite scene of hers, I'm not going to show you, is when we see her dancing with a chicken. She takes a chicken, she just dances with it. But here again is this image or this scene in which she has to be light and frivolous and weird, but also connected to nature. And so this is a constant way in which masculinity has depicted women as the natural being or the being that's supposed to reflect the beauty of nature, or being close with nature. She's always, the way that we see her come into this film is always in relation to Neil, so much so that she gives up her daughter to be with him, right? And it's a really quick moment. Like I said, so all these big moments like the IUD, like we see her, this is a big deal. We never see her make the big decision of leaving her child to be with Neil. That would have made her have depth, I think, and so therefore is not actually depicted in the film. And even stays with Neil, even when he becomes violent. We see scenes of him like ripping off her panties in the water, but then 2 seconds later you see her on her knees kissing his feet, things like this. Okay? And so Eva will do anything on her own, including regular checkup where she experiences uterine pain. And then one of my favorite really bad scenes, which do I have time to show that one? I don't know if I want to. Sure. Part of me doesn't want to show too many clips because I kind of want you to go see it and then be like, oh! But there is a scene in which you see the one friendship with another woman. I assume it's her friend from Paris coming to visit. You're not given an explanation, or it could just be a random Parisian lady who lives in a small town in Oklahoma or Texas. There's really no explanation. But basically, this French woman is completely erratic. Just walking around with her saying, free yourself, love yourself, and like what freedom is defined by this young woman, this friend of Maria, is to get away from her boyfriend and then start dancing and being seductive. And it's a sexual freedom. And it's one of the most ridiculous moments in film I've ever seen. All right, maybe I should show it. Here, 1:14. How much time do I have?
Whatever.
No, really, how much?
Yeah, it's fine, thank you.
Okay, I'll give you a moment of this.
Tu non hai bisogno di niente, tu sei libera, noi siamo zingare. Tu sei come me, tu sei zingara. Come on baby. Vieni qua. Io sono l'esperimento di me stessa. Venite a prendermi! Sono qui! Ma la gente! Dove? Dove sta la gente? Sono tutti morti, non c'è nessuno, non c'è niente! Voglio qualcuno che mi sorprenda! Voglio qualcuno che mi sorprenda! Dove siete? Dove state? Shh. Non per tanto tempo. Che guardi? Anche tu pensi che sia un mostro? Un mostro cattivo? Un vampiro? Una strega? Ho visto tutto.
So, like, here's just completely like absurd conversation, absurd way of talking to your friend. A monster, evil, like nobody talks like that to their best friend. I don't care if you're French. I have plenty of French friends, they don't talk like that, okay? So again, a projection of what a crazy French woman would be like is what we get from Terrence Malick in this best friend. Now, the last clip I want to show you before I move on, but just let you guys decide whether or not, or if we can have a kind of conversation about this film together in ways in which I believe we can acknowledge both its sexism and its intent to be something more than a sexist film. I really want to talk about Jane because Jane is supposed to be somehow different from Marina. She's supposed to be the more, I guess, concrete of the two. But she too twirls around in fields. She too is depicted by the fact that she's constantly sad and she's in need of Neil to rescue her from her sadness, right? And so we see the same thing. I would say she's the exact same character as Marina. There's nothing really different about Jane's character from Marina. And the reason why I want to pick this in one particular moment, even though it's not a moment where she's dancing or twirling around. There are moments in which she does do that, but I want to get to a different moment where we see how incompetent she is. First off, I work at a ranch. I've never seductively held my ranch lasso or anything like that, so I just wanted to get that off. I also don't stare off the windows because sadly, just making sure this is. similar things. There's so many different ways I could argue. So I'll let you guys talk to us about the film, and maybe I'll show different clips to reinforce my views. Same with David. But again, this is one of those weird films that I love kind of arguing against, but I also see why others can find it beautiful. But at the same time, it's a beauty at the expense of complex characters, i.e. real women. So, thank you. What?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we could go to questions, and both of us can respond to each other. But why don't we just go to discussion and questions if you have questions? I have things to say that I can, but go ahead. Yes?
I think that was interesting when you said that, like, Ben Affleck is kind of like a zombie. Because also I would say that it is kind of frustrating for him not to, like, show any emotion or, like, to do anything. It's like this, like, weird, like, tension, I think, that the director was probably trying to, like, maybe create. But it is frustrating to see how, like, there isn't, like, any, like, communication. It's almost like almost that, what's her name? Is this Jane?
The blonde is Jane, yes.
Yeah, how Jane is, like, doing all, like, the emotion, trying to get something out of, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'm like, what's his name?
Neil.
Yeah, Neil. So, yeah, that was just a comment. Sorry, that wasn't a question. But.
I'll make one observation about that. It's interesting. I mentioned that the three films that come in a cluster around the time of To the Wonder or autobiographical, The Tree of Life, which is an amazing film, and which is about us growing up, basically, To the Wonder, and then Song to Song, which is even more abstract and, if you could say, expressionistic than this film is. But the interesting thing is, Neil is the Terrence Malick character. And I think it's striking that he presents himself as a zombie. And if we do have time, we'll have some questions. But the film doesn't end with the Lorica, the prayer of St. Patrick. It actually ends with a set of scenes in which Marina is by herself. And I think what Malick is suggesting with that is that Marina does find a self apart independently from Neil. Indeed, there's a scene toward the end where they're in an airport, and as Dr. Layne already mentioned, Marina says, and I don't know why, she says, "I'll keep your name." But they clearly split up. They're no longer together. And we see a couple of fragmentary scenes of Neil in a really cool-looking architectural house. Again, that's Malick and his sensitivity for visuals. But then we also see an extended scene of Marina. She's out in nature, yeah. So that's
lying in a swamp.
She does. Well, it's wet ground anyway. It's not a
She's
swamp.
stroking the wet ground. Okay, so just
Well, we'll watch the scene. Maybe we'll watch that scene after all. I think what Malick is suggesting there is that she does find a kind of independence from Neil. And by the way, the thing about nature, starting with Malick's first film, he is obsessed with nature. The 1998 film, The Thin Red Line, is a war movie, and Jim Caviezel plays Private Wit, if I remember. No, that's the Sean Penn character. I forget the name of the character anyway. Jim Caviezel goes native in, he goes AWOL from his unit, and there are all kinds of scenes of him stroking weed, essentially. Metaphorically, I mean, he does it differently. He hangs out in a canoe and he does all kinds of stuff like that, because Malick is interested in the relationship between human beings and nature. And so that's not a theme that we only find female characters with respect to. Indeed, one of the strange things about his films, The Tree of Life, this is true of The Tree of Life, but also The Thin Red Line, is it has shots of nature that seem completely disconnected from the narrative of the film. And yet I think they're there for a reason. Questions, comments, go ahead. Louis.
What's the salient thesis about which the two of you disagree?
So I think we actually agree with the film is about. So I do agree that this film really is, like, it turns out to attempting to make a film about an imminent transcendence, that human beings live in despair, despite the fact that the beauty and like is right there before us. And I think what we disagree on, and correct me is about how much the sexism of this film outweighs that theme. And I want to say that the sexism of the film is so bad that it doesn't matter what Terrence Malick is doing, that I think it's a dangerous way of depicting women. I think it's, I also don't think Terrence Malick is aware of his sexism. So kind of like how much do we want to promote authors who seem to not even be aware of the themes that they're playing into? And so,
That's probably where we disagree. I would disagree. I think there are some clearly odd, bizarre, awkward depictions of women in To the Wonder, perhaps more than other films of Malick's. I'm not sure about that. But I don't know. I don't think that the oddness or awkwardness or even sexism of certain images counts as or amounts to a sufficient reason to dismiss the film, is what I would say. Yeah. Is that clear enough, Louis? Or
Well, I'm a philosopher, so that means quite clear.
yeah, okay, all right.
have you seen the film, Louis?
No.
No. How about the young women that saw the film? What do you guys think?
I think something that was like pretty evident was when you're talking about it's through the male gaze. Like even the clips we just watched, it's like super obvious because it's always on the girl, and it's like she's being super like sexualized, and you don't see that in Ben Affleck at all. And so that's like hard to watch. And also the whole doctor's appointment thing. I think that was a good example of like. I mean, it wasn't like Ben Affleck was having a problem or like his body could ever be an issue. It was like the woman is tied to her body and the woman has an issue and therefore it becomes this big deal. But if he was having a problem, I don't think that would be an essential part of the movie or as dramatic as it was portrayed here.
I haven't seen the movies, but just from looking at these clips, I think it's interesting how the camera angles are also not just at the woman, but down to the woman. It's not like, it's because it's from the perspective of the Ben Affleck who's tall and manly and masculine, it's like angled down at the woman to like, I don't know, it seems very interesting. And Dr. Calhoun talked about how, Malick uses every single way, like, he's very specific about what he does with the music and the imagery and this, so I don't know why he wouldn't, it seems like he would have understood that, like it seems like he had purpose in having the camera angle down at the window. If he had so much, importance on everything else, how would that slip his mind, this camera angle,
No, I agree.
But also, is that implying like that she needs transcendence to move up, and kind of like she's the only one in need of transcendence? Because Ben is like portrayed as already being higher. I don't know.
I wouldn't agree with that at all. Malick, well, here's the reason. Malick is, I think he's obsessive about particular things like camera angles. And some of the scenes that I showed at the beginning, I think he loves upward-facing shots, and they don't have any humans in them. He loves just looking up at trees. That's a standard Malick shot. If you look at, it really goes back at least to thin red line, but you find it in almost all of his films. And also characters looking up at planes passing. That's one in Song to Song, is that they're constantly looking up. The main character there is Christian Bale, who's in a bad way, by the way, and he's constantly looking up. But I don't know, the reason I think that's almost saying Ben Affleck doesn't need transcendence, I think just ignores the content of the film.
No, I think he does.
He's a zombie. He's a sleepwalker. He does have a job, but he sleepwalks through his job like he sleepwalks through everything, including his relationships. At least Marina is awake to the tension, the psychic tension, the existential tension that she faces as a human being. Neil doesn't even make it that far. And so, I don't know, I guess this does affect, to go back, Louis, to your question, I think you can only think that the male is privileged in this film if you discount the way Neil is depicted. Nobody wants to be like Neil. In fact, I asked Dr. Layne this question when we were punching out about the film the other day. I said, "Who's the hero of the film?" And she didn't answer my question. But I think the hero clearly is Marina. Neil is not the hero of the film. Neil is. This is really kind of ironic from a feminist point of view. Neil is freaking window dressing. That's all he is. He happens to be around when interesting things are happening. But nothing interesting ever happens to Neil. Because Neil he's, in Kierkegaardian terms, he's so deep in despair, he doesn't even know he's in despair.
So let me respond to that for just a second. Because I do agree that all the characters, so that Neil isn't the hero of this film, and that it's supposed to be it's kind of bait and switch. We're led to believe that it's about his transcendence. But as Professor Calhoun emphasizes, it becomes about Marina's transcendence. She seems to be the one character that eventually looks off and is able to transcend and see beauty all around her. So you get a sense that maybe she is the heroine of this film. But again, she's been depicted from the male gaze, so it's not a real woman. It's the masculine woman, a woman. And so any sort of transcendence that she can have in this film is not an actual woman's transcendence. It's how masculine or how men want women or the hero to transcend. Okay? So keep that in mind, right? We don't actually have a complex character who is a woman who actually has depth or anything about her besides lying in grass and stroking, and then suddenly, we get a hint that she gets it at the very, very end. But again, I don't think this film has done this responsibly. Okay? And yes, I don't think that Ben Affleck's character is a model for transcendence. He's a zombie, completely devoid. But what we're asked to, as viewers of this film, is to read this film in such a way as to revive it of all of its kind of shallowness. We, as reader of film, are meant to do all the work. Okay? And so it's saying, and that work has to come to my perspective, this perspective in which I, man, am constantly in search of a woman to help me do my activity of transcendence, but I always fail at it. And so one of the things we're supposed to see with Ben Affleck's characters is how the despair of this masculine who really means nothing, and is always kind of going from one woman to the next to gain some sort of transcendence. And so at the end of the day, this film is demanding that somehow that women, if only he had seen this swamp stroking, dancing, frolicking person for her ability to transcend, then he too could have been rescued. It's demanding again that women rescue men, even though the film isn't really about him. Does that make sense? And rescue men from their despair and their sadness versus actually be something independent and distinct from the masculine character in this film. But don't get me wrong, he's not the only masculine character in this film. We also have the priest, who gets a full story, who's complex and interesting, who does, I believe, realize that God has been with him the whole time. So he's going through this dark night of the soul throughout the whole film, and then we see it kind of in his giving that prayer of, is it Francis you said?
St. Patrick.
St. Patrick, this like kind of realizing of, oh, I've been looking for God elsewhere, but God has been in my work with the heroin addict or my work with the single mom. And so you see this beautiful, complex moment in which this priest kind of redeems everything in this film. Everything. Because he makes it 100% clear. And again, we have 2 men in this film and 2 women. Both women are vacuous and completely shallow, whereas at least with the one depiction of the 2 men, we might have a kind of shallow husk of a zombie that is Ben Affleck, but then we get this completely rich character and complexity in the other. And so if he was being a responsible filmmaker and was trying to juxtaposition 2 different forms of transcendence in the varieties of ways in which we see masculine and feminine characters, one of the feminine characters would need to have been much more complex and much more interesting, something that actually parallels Father
Okay, yeah.
I'm curious, Dr. Calhoun, if you, so you disagreed on the fact that the sexist scenes take away from the theme, but I'm curious if you think that the sexist scenes are necessary in the movie, or if you think they portray or add to what the overall message was.
That's a good question. I think I would say 2 things. One, some of the scenes that we're arguing about, I would say, are not sexist. There are some that are awkward and odd and sexist in the certainly in the way that in the affect to the viewer, I would say. So there are some, but some are not. Because I think, for example, what I've tried to say about nature is I think if you look at Malick's films, you see this obsession with nature runs through as a common theme. And so the idea that it's the feminine that is the natural and the feminine that is the in tune with nature, that doesn't fit the way Malick makes films. Because he's trying to argue that nature is always there. In fact, this is more clear in The Tree of Life, perhaps, where the Tree of Life is, according to Malick, a mode of revelation of God. God reveals himself through nature. And so some of those scenes, it's funny the way that you've been talking about rubbing grain. It makes me think of Gladiator with Russell Crowe, and I don't think he's a feminine character.
But it's like a constant trope, right?
It is. It's a major theme in the film.
No, but in order to depict his movement to heaven, right? And so that we see this rubbing of grain and the movement towards death, right? And so that we're supposed to aim the Gladiator to think of this touching of grain as going to heaven versus something that women do all of the time, right? So keep this in mind, right? Like every depiction of women in this film, like it's we don't like it's imbued with meaning in the Gladiator, this touching of grain. Like this that we all he's going to heaven, or we get with this moment of trying to do, versus it's just a shot of a woman as if that's how we behave when we're in fields. Okay? I know when I'm in a field, I'm worried about ticks. I'm not playing with the grain. Yes, sometimes, maybe when I was on a romantic date, but maybe this film is trying to depict all those romantic weird dates where people touch grain. I don't know. But the problem is that it's consistent and repetitive, and it's not imbued with any meaning throughout.
But yeah, so your point, are there clumsy scenes that amount to sexism? Yeah, I would grant that. Are they necessary? No, I think Malick's a better filmmaker than that. So, although, I mean, the other thing that you'll see, if you watch any of Malick's films, even just one of them, you can see he's a revolutionarily innovative filmmaker, and he tries things, and sometimes they don't work. I mean, I think Song to Song is even more elliptical and narratively fragmented, and I think I know what he's doing in the film, but a lot of critics thought it didn't work very well. Apparently, the film that's coming out in about a month, A Hidden Life, he's returning to a much clearer sense of narration that his first 2 films did have. So I don't know. I think that's going to reflect that's going to, it's going to be a return to a different kind of filmmaking again from this experimental period of the last 20 years or so.
So I'm trying to think here. I just had an idea. So to go beyond like the necessity of or without like sexist scenes, do you think there's a type of like dichotomy or relationship to like Adam and Eve? Like, do you think the director's imports some of that narrative into his movies? And you can expand on that. I don't know too much. I just wanted to know if you think, any of you guys think that like he wants to show maybe a relationship between the male and the female in his movies with Adam and Eve in any way, especially like with the Tree of Life. I don't know if there's like this like, because there may or may not be tension, I don't know if there's like some sort of drawback to that story at all.
I mean, my first instinct was to say maybe, because...
It's kind of a big question, sorry.
I haven't seen Tree of Life in a really long time. I'll come back on David and trust that his interpretation is sound. But in this film, right, if we're going to be thinking about the fact that both women characters express over and over again the desire to be his wife, and continuously, like, I want to be your wife, and then demanding that's somehow going to be how it is that they get past their despair. Even the little girl in this film, the daughter of Marina, she's obsessed with her mom marrying Ben Affleck's character as well. And so...
She is for a while, but then she distances.
Well,
she decides she doesn't really like him. She says, "You're not my father," explicitly.
And she says there's something missing, right? So that Marina's daughter seems to sense the fact that in this world of Marina and Neil, that they're both zombies, so to speak. They're both kind of not real people. And I think that's why she leaves and goes to be with her father. So we get this sense of we're watching a film about people who aren't real. But at the end of the day, all three of the female characters revolve around Neil and the desire to be somehow related to him through marriage. And if that's how we define Eve as always and only wife and mother, then yes, there is a kind of parallel there. But keep in mind, right? Like, I don't think that Terrence Malick intends to be sexist. I think, unfortunately, a lot of men aren't aware of how they play into certain tropes that reinforce certain dangerous and problematic ideas about women. And one of the more responsible things that we can do is to say, look, I see that this film is beautiful, but it is also highly problematic. And we have a duty to recognize it so that men may rethink how they depict women in their artsy-fartsy films in the future.
Just one very brief thing about the Tree of Life. It's pretty clear Malick is working with male-female archetypes, but they're not Adam and Eve so much as grace nature. The Mrs. O'Brien character, played by Jessica Chastain, is gracious and loving and emotionally connected to her children, whereas the Mr. O'Brien character, played by Brad Pitt, is harsh and demanding. But I think I've thought a lot about the Tree of Life, and I think that's an intentional misdirection by Malick, because what he wants to actually argue is that nature and grace are actually the same. They turn out to be, they should be brought together. They should be integrated. Indeed, a critical theme of the film is, well, I think it would take me forever to say that. I'll just say Malick is trying to intertwine these and show that what seems often to be dichotomous is actually, again, to use a kind of Kierkegaardian way of thinking about this, that they're synthesized, they're brought together. That we often think of choosing between grace and nature, and indeed choosing between the feminine and the masculine. And Malick wants to undercut that distinction.
I'm curious as to where both of these stand on where this transcendence is going towards and where it's going away from. in the character that transcends. Is transcendence towards God? Does it come across accurate?
I think Malick is elliptical about this and vague, and indeed, starting with Tree of Life, there were a number of, especially continental film commentators, that were really big fans of Malick, and when the Christian themes became more pronounced with the Tree of Life, they decided they didn't like Malick so much. And I think that actually shows one of the reasons why Malick is elliptical about what this transcendence is directed toward. And indeed, I think, and I've argued in print, I have professional scholarly work that I've written about this, that I think that Malick is essentially a kind of Christian natural theologian. But I think he also purposely, given the cultural context in which he operates, he's not writing or filming Christian propaganda, I think. Does that help as an answer?
It didn't feel like it.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I agree with David that that's what was topic because it was over here. Like, let's finish this now. No, you're just testing me, sorry. In any case, I think this film is about transcendence and transcendence towards God, right? Because if you watch the movie a couple of times, you can rewatch it. So all of the voiceovers on the surface, if you've only seen the film one time, seem to be voiceovers of Marina and her desire for Neil. It's constant, I want to be with you, I like to touch you, everything I do is for you. But if you see the end of the film and you think that the film actually ultimately ends up about Marina coming to conversion and coming to see that the real love is God, then you can reread all the voiceovers as her actually talking about her relationship with God or the divine. And so that it helps you reread the film in a way in which all of her dancing and everything is a kind of joyous celebration of the God in the world. And that's one of the ways that you can view this film, is the kind of transcendence that Marina seems to invoke. Again, though, I don't think this film does it well. There are lots of films that do this, and not at the expense of turning women into silly things and aesthetic objects. One of my favorite films is called Dogville by Lars von Trier, and it too is about grace and law and transcendence and the way that and it explicitly plays on the themes of objectification of women. So it turns Grace, Nicole Kidman's character, into an object that is used, even raped by characters, other characters in the film, so that we get this sense that grace is something that is constantly being damaged and kind of taken for granted by people. Other things that we also see in this film that Ben Affleck is taking for granted, the character of transcendence or whatever it is. But Dogville does it in a way that seems to be aware of all the ways in which the history of ideas and philosophy have turned women into those things. So it seems to be aware of all the sex and gender issues that it's playing with. Whereas I think Terrence Malick is only liminally aware of the holes or traps that he's falling into with regards to the way that he depicts women. It doesn't seem, I don't trust him as an author of women in this film. Whereas Lars von Trier, he too, very sexist, but he seems to be aware of all the various ways his sexism can subvert the way we normally think about things like race and faith and transcendence. I love films about faith. I'm a feminist, but I love films about faith, transcendence, all of these things. And so don't just get me wrong, like don't think that I hate this film because it's about Christianity or faith and transcendence. In fact, I give the films that I always want to hate these films, but I still don't think at the expense.
I have not seen the film, and I actually came here tonight to kind of learn more about it. And as I saw those parts and I heard what Dr. Calhoun said and what Dr. Layne said, you're both right on many levels. although with the doctor scene, I don't know, I happened to notice that the priest was speaking in Spanish, I think. And she was also speaking to her French girlfriend, I think, or whatever, but she had, it looked like she wasn't American, I don't know.
Yeah, they're French.
Ukrainian. She's, although again, I mean, this is part of Malick's elliptical style. She's Ukrainian, but she's living in Paris, and then she moves to the U.S. to be with Neil.
Okay, a little confusing. But if she's Ukrainian, then she probably has some deep cultural issues about abortion. It could be. And as I'm listening to it, thinking, not abortion, I'm sorry, but the
use of the IUD.
Yes, the use of the IUD, and also perhaps some guilt. She had it, it's causing her trouble. It's not going to make me have hysterectomy, is it? And then harkening back to what would my mother say, how would this, and then, you know, but if indeed on a literary level, because I don't know much about Terrence Malick, except that I did see parts of the Tree of Life, and I was very, very interested in the way that nature, it was graceful. You see these children moving in ways I've never seen American children move. They were just like graceful and beautiful, and I'm watching this thing going, where do these kids come from? How do you even film something like this? But the interesting thing here is that I think nature and the human who can connect with that nature is thinking, I mean, there's ingrained, there's fertility, there's so many other complex depths here that I'm kind of thinking of because I used to teach literature, but I'm also thinking, how though could that be, you know, like the vacuous parts of, like, I could not believe Rachel Adams. I mean, what? And I mean, I could throw that veil way better than she could, but still, remember her husband had died, right?
Yeah, but
she might have been doing it counts, not that. So I'm excusing her, but at the same time, I just think that there's something there that we could be missing as well. I don't agree with the vacuity of both of them, but I do think there may be some other elements there that are needing to be paid attention to. And not dismissed quickly.
No, I agree. Like, yeah. I hope I'm not dismissing. Like, I hope that I figured. Like,
I mean, parts that we didn't discuss, like fertility, for example. I mean, that idea that the green, the ground, you know, this is Mother Earth. This is if indeed Malick is connected to the earth and sees this nature thing as being a transcendent element, maybe there is something there that if he had just made his women more complex, maybe there would have been redemption in the whole way that he handled the girl.
That's my point, right? Is that, like, I can see various different ways in which we can puzzle out beautiful, interesting, philosophical things.
However, the other thing is, I mean, these other elements are true. The doctor scene, though, I kind of do take a very different perspective.
Well, so this is a good example of what I mean by responsible filmmaking. Right, so that here, I would love it if he had given me any sort of indication of any of those reasons of why she thinks she needs a hysterectomy or why she's having a dramatic moment when, you know, most people would just be a regular gynecological moment and it's just like, that uterine pain is caused by this. So there's no indication from the screenwriter or director of why this is so dramatic. And why she doesn't seem to understand that she even has, like, it's as if she's, I have an IUD? Like, as if she never made these decisions. We have no indication. There's no way.
I didn't get it from that, though. No. I got a completely different message.
But the point is there's no clues. There's no way
well, he doesn't get clues about anything.
But that's the point. Like, if there was any sort of way I could read this film as giving me evidence for what you just said, then I'd be like, okay.
But he doesn't want to overemphasize that that's his art. He's just there. She's Ukrainian.
At the expense of, she looks like an idiot now. So that's the thing, is that I would totally, I would love to be able to read that scene that way, but there's no evidence in that scene for reading it that way. The only evidence that I'm given as a reader of this film is that she's unaware of her body and that she does not know what's going on. And so all I get is confusion, as if she doesn't know things that are basic to a woman's body. Mm-hmm. And so that's the problem.
And what I'm seeing is there's, in my view as I was watching her, I was thinking, she's in her mind, and actually, I think she's deeply thinking about a hyper-awareness of her body, actually. I don't think I think he's being patronizing, actually, but I think the doctor, but I think Ben Affleck pacing in the background, and her going like this needs something a little bit different than our, the American thing that we would just slap onto the event.
Yeah, I just disagree.
I would argue actually that's closely connected to your earlier question about parts that are sexist that we might disagree about, because I think the elliptical nature, especially of Malick's films, roughly starting with The New World, which is the Pocahontas story, and running pretty much through the last couple of films that he's made, I think they're hermeneutically open, by which I mean there are a lot of scenes that you can read responsibly in very different ways, and I think sometimes Malick films end up being a kind of mirror. They reflect the interpretive position of the person interpreting it. He actually has a weird scene in The Tree of Life that I think doesn't fit in unless you're looking for this very thing about him being very interested as a filmmaker in the question of interpretation. It's a weird scene where the dad, Brad Pitt, sits his sons down. He's been on a trip and he comes back and they go to a pizzeria. They're ordering spaghetti, and he tells them what interpretation. I forget exactly how the scene goes, but he tells them something about the nature of interpretation, as if his kids care about that, right? So what's that scene doing in the film? I think it's a kind of clue that Malick is tuned into this question of interpretation. And he knows that a scene it's interesting, I don't see the doctor scene in the way, I think the doctor's patronizing, I agree with that, but I don't see the scene at all as, I don't know about my body, I'm a total idiot, that's not the way I've ever seen that scene.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to remember all those aspects of the literature and everything too, and to remember that there's cultural differences happening here, but also that I want to be informed about things that are that we need information on in responsible film watching and responsible film support. So I just think this was a very healthy, fun exchange tonight.
This is what we were hoping to model, guys, is that we can have intense disagreement, still be good friends.
Yeah.
We do this this is what our friendship is like. This constant,
it's awesome.
You only think this because you're a man. You only think this because you're a crazy feminist, without actually ever saying things like that.
Yeah.
Because it's more about the conversation and recognizing that's what makes life interesting, is being able to see things from a variety of different perspectives and to enter into each other's worlds in ways that make everybody uncomfortable, but at the same time change us, transform us, help us figure out ways in which we can debate our argument, not in an echo chamber, but besides the advantage points of the people we care about and love.
That's a nice summation. We're over time already. I can't resist putting in a plug. The final meeting of the Socratic is on December the 2nd, and a visiting scholar to the university Matthew Owen is going to speak on neuroscience and the soul and how they're compatible, which is a bizarre idea, so I want to hear what he has to say. That's on December the 2nd, 4:30 p.m. Up in Hemmingson 314. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.